5 minutes delay. We were waiting for one of our vice dean for the research in our university, from our university, but we don't know if he's, in traffic or something, and he doesn't pick the phone, so it's impossible to reach them. But anyway, to reach him, sorry. But anyway, we'll start it. So very informally, as always. So first, thank you very much for being here. It is a huge honor, a huge pleasure to welcome you all. We are really happy to start this, or to open this, our third conference, Colonial and Post-Colonial Landscape. 6 years ago when we started, and our first venture with Fundação Calouste Gulbenkian, which has this marvelous space and always is very warm here. They really welcome here very well. So when we started this first venture 6 years ago, we didn't at the time know that we will be here still 3 editions after. So we are really very, very happy to be able to accomplish this third edition. And we continue to do it because we learn a lot from this conference. It has been for us as a team. So I'm here, but I represent a team of young researchers, people that are very dear to me, and they trust me for all these years. And even if it's not the right place, I would like to introduce them, because I want you to know them, since without them, this conference would be impossible. So the first one is Filipa. Filipa is here, Filipa Fiuza. She's here with me for a long time. And then we have Beatriz Resina and Francesca Vita. She's going to introduce Nzinga later. I don't want to forget nobody, but I think in the audience there is Inês Rodrigues and Leonor. It's there. We also have Fernando Pires. It's our senior, our photographer. And Nuno Tavares da Conceição. I think he's there. And in our team, our youngest it's not the youngest member, but our youngest, the late acquisition for the team, Filipa Lopes. I believe she's also here. It's our archivist. And we cannot forget also Sonia. Unfortunately, she was not able to come. But, I just want you to know them, because we don't know if you are going to do it a 4th edition, so I really want you to know them, because they are an amazing team, an amazing research. And besides being a huge and super researchers, they were able to organize that. We also invite Alexandra Areia to be the curator of tomorrow's session. A former student, a PhD student of mine, and I believe did I esqueci-me de alguém? No? Okay, so that's all. So, and we are very grateful to DINÂMIA'CET and Paulo, our director, Paulo Tomenta Pinto. He will present, our research unit. So, what I really wanted to, before end my very short presentation here, what I really wanted to know that, I hope these days will be so good for you, as I'm sure for us will be, and I'm sure we will work a lot. I'm sure the sessions will be really, really interesting. We had some difficulties choosing. For the first time, we have to say no, to reject some sessions that were really good, but that was impossible to have all the people. We are also very sad because some of our colleagues from the United States weren't able to come. We live very, very difficult political situations nowadays, and our colleagues, they couldn't take the risk coming and not be able to return. So they asked them to tape their representations. So some of them, they will be able to communicate with us and be able to attend and to be at the presentations online, but unfortunately they will not be here. Because what I think it's more important in our conference, it's to be together and to meet every 3 years and to talk about our accomplishments, to talk about our research, to share our work. I think that it's the most important. So I'm really thrilled for having you here. Very grateful, as I said before, and thank you very much. So you are really welcome for coming. So now, don't forget that tomorrow we will have the movie sessions curated by Alexandra. You have a pamphlet about our project. Well, the dean is I will attend. But this is a little propaganda about our project. That's what allowed us to be here today, and the program. Okay, so I think it's everything you need to know. And so we will have today Paulo Tormenta Pinto. He is going to talk a little about our research unit, to present our research unit. Then we'll have Bernardo Miranda, which is the head of the architecture department of our school. So we invited him because it's very important, this connection between research and teaching. And we will have our vice dean, Helena Carreiras, from the internationalization section of the ISCTE. I don't know how to say it in English. But she will, of course, talk a little and explain a little more the challenge that our institution and our school faced regarding research and internationalization. I know that she prepared some notes to share with us. So thank you very much, and I will try to figure out what happened with our guest. Okay, so Paulo.
So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, welcome. So it's with a great pleasure that we open this third edition of the conference Colonial and Post-Colonial Landscapes, hosted here at Fundação Calouste Gulbenkian, a space that has long forest critical reflection, cultural dialogue, and intellectual rigor. This year, we gather around a central and urgent theme: architecture, cities, and labor. Architecture is never neutral. Cities are never innocent. And labor is never invisible. The built environment is not merely a material record of aesthetical technical ambition. It is also a sedimentation of economic systems, power relations, and social hierarchies. In colonial contexts, architecture and urbanism were deeply entangled with regimes of extraction, racialization, segregation, and forced or precarious labor. The city functioned simultaneously as infrastructure and instrument. The third edition of the conference emerged from the sustained research agenda led by Ana Vaz Milheiro and her team. Those work as conscientiously integrated in the special legacies of colonialism. The focus of architecture, cities, and labor reflects an ongoing commitment also explored in her ERC-funded project ArchLabour. It invites us to look beyond formal histories of architecture and to examine the labor conditions, material flows, and asymmetrical structures that shape colonial and post-colonial landscapes. In doing so, it encourages us to read buildings and cities not only as design objects, but sites of work, of visible and invisible labor, embedded in broader political and economic systems. To speak of colonial landscape inevitably means engaging with the question of colonial trauma. The violence of colonial systems did not operate only through military conquest or administrative control. It was inscribed in territory, in housing typologies, in infrastructural hierarchies in labor regimes, and in everyday spatial segregation. The trauma was spatialized, and its traces remained embedded in contemporary cities. Yet, as important as it is to acknowledge colonial trauma, it is equally necessary to think beyond it. Beyond does not mean forgetting or minimizing. It means asking how can research, architecture, and urban practice contribute to reparation, reinterpretation, and transformation? How can we move from the analysis of historical wounds toward the construction of more equitable futures? And how might spatial knowledge participate in process of decolonization, epistemic, social, and material? In this context, we also recognize the crucial role of DINÂMIA'CET-Iscte. Those interdisciplinary research framework enables the intersection of architecture with the social sciences, political economy, and territorial studies. This dialogue strengthens the analysis depth in the conference and broadens its critical horizon. This gathering is therefore not only about revisiting the past, it is about rethinking the foundation of our disciplines. It is about questioning those labor builds the city we inherit, those knowledge was marginalized, and those spatial future are still being negotiated. Over the next days, we will explore archives, case studies, theoretical frameworks, and methodological tools. But above all, we will engage in dialogue across geographies, generations, and disciplines. May this conference continue to expand our collective capacity to confront difficult histories, to refine our analytical tools, and to imagine architectural and urban futures that acknowledge their past while not being confined by it. Thank you and welcome to the third edition of the Colonial and Post-Colonial Landscape.
So now we'll ask Ana Vaz, our head of our architecture department in ISCTE. It's difficult to pronunciate it, but it's University Institute of Lisbon, right? I always miss the... Okay.
Hola, Ana. Hello, everybody, dear friends and colleagues. As director of the Department of Architecture at ISCTE, I would like to express how meaningful it is for us to see this Congress on colonial and post-colonial landscapes take place here. This field of study is of great value to our institution as it deepens our understanding of Portugal's long and complex relationship with Africa and enriches the way we reflect on our shared histories. This, for me, it's really something special because we don't have a good relation with our past, with our colonies, and this is a completely different approach. I must also say, half in jest, that the surprise I feel in addressing you today is comparable to the surprise I still feel at finding myself not long ago appointed director of the architecture program. I wish you all a productive and inspiring gathering, and I would like to end by thanking Ana Vaz Milheiro for her remarkable work and unwavering dedication, which have been essential to making this event and this field of study possible. Thank you all, and thank you, Ana, in a very special way.
And before we have our keynote speaker, myself, okay. Before we will have the present to listen to the words of our vice dean, is also representing our director here today.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me as Vice Director for Internationalization at the ISCTE University Institute of Lisbon to welcome, they tell me, over 130 participants from 20 different nationalities present in this conference. Allow me to congratulate the organizers, especially, of course, my colleague Ana Vaz Milheiro and her team, DINÂMIA'CET as the hosting research center, the department, of course, of architecture, as well as all the participants in the network that has been built around the ERC project ArchLabour. Allow me also to acknowledge the role of the various institutions that have supported this project and made the conference possible. The European Research Council, the Portuguese Foundation for Science and Technology, and the Gulbenkian Foundation. ISCTE, you may never be able to pronounce it well, but we cannot, it's already a label, we cannot do without it. ISCTE is proud to be the home of ArchLabour and other 4 ERC grants that have strengthened our profile as a leading research university in Portugal. I'm going to just mention a couple of topics because you are really wanting to listen to the keynote speaker, not to me, but allow me. And they are less about ISCTE as an institution than they are about the topic you are discussing, which really made me very enthusiastic when I try to learn a little bit more. When I come to this type of gathering, I do want to say a few relevant words and not just, this circumstance. So I was more interested in the topic. So first of all, why do I think and why would I like to underline the relevance of the topics and the project that you're discussing? Well, for many reasons. First, because it lies at the heart of contemporary historiography's central debate, the rupture or continuity in colonization and decolonization processes, and the discussion about which dimension prevails and predominates. In my own personal experience as former defense minister, I often visited counterparts in Portuguese-speaking African countries, and it is interesting to note how, whether in Saint Tomé and Príncipe or Angola, or as well as in India, in the British case, newly independent nationals, instead of destroying, appropriated colonial buildings that were the seat of colonial power to exercise their newly independent post-colonial power. This is the case with many current presidential palaces located in former colonial governors' palaces, not only in Saint Tomé, but also in Luanda. This continued use of colonial buildings, and for the same purpose, is a sign of continuity and not just rupture, revolution between colonizers and colonized, which introduces nuances in the complex nature of decolonization processes. Second, the relevance of the connection between labor and the production of colonial and post-colonial landscapes in a context of power asymmetry. By placing workers and their agency at the center of the research, the project challenges prevailing narratives about colonialism or about architecture and its historiography. Third, the relevance of the project and what you're discussing to contemporary labor dynamics. The project helps us understand how forms of spatial segregation, unequal access to buildings and infrastructure, mobility, and job insecurity in construction persist today. It thus helps us to better understand contemporary relationships between space, work, and power, especially in post-colonial countries. In the current Portuguese context, for example, which has similarities with many other countries, from Europe to Asia to the Gulf countries, demographic and real estate pressures in the cities are accelerating urban reconfiguration and creating a strong dependence on migrant labor, which is often precarious, poorly paid, and subject to racial inequalities, particularly evident in the construction sector. Fourth, its relevance to the discussion on urbanism, technology, and sustainability. And I will not go into my notes because I would take too long. But finally, also underline the relevance of the project to collective memory and remembrance policies. It is only through a plurality of disciplines and perspectives, such as those intersecting this project, that we can think of colonialism and colonial legacies as social processes and not just political processes. By addressing topics such as colonial photography as an instrument of surveillance and simultaneously evidence of workers' agency in architectural production, the architecture and organization of housing for colonial and migrant workers, the training of the workforce, the configuration of agricultural landscapes and informal spaces, or gender dimensions, ArchLabour illustrates well how colonialism and territorial occupation result from social processes marked by hierarchies, resistance, and agency. Taken together, these different discussions allow us to reconstruct colonial memory by valuing its impact on current urban spaces, the relationships between different communities in a common space, and the common ground necessary to build our collective identity. Secondly, my second note, the project showcases much of what ISCTE is all about. A leading university that bridges disciplines, connecting social sciences, management, and technologies, where interdisciplinarity is a fundamental characteristic, one we cherish and we're proud of, and where research and teaching are strongly articulated. Last year, 7 of ISCTE's 8 research units obtained an excellent rating and one a very good rating from the National Science Foundation. Our proportion of students or at postgraduate level is particularly high if compared to the average Portuguese universities. Postgraduate students represent almost 60% of the total number of students. So this strong postgraduate component attracts a lot of international students who already represent about 25% of the total enrolled majority of the academic community that is, of course, involved in advanced level research and studies. Our motto has been a space to grow. And my wish is that these encounters will be spaces to grow for you, the community of the more directly involved, but for all of us who are learning from your work, as I did when I prepared these few notes. I think it is very important that we keep on gathering like this and saying the words that have been forbidden. We live in a world where books are being burned, and some of the words you are using are forbidden in some very close contexts. And where people who think differently are being persecuted, where the other is diabolized, and where resistance is fundamental, and it can be enacted through this type of gatherings. So I wish that we can have the passion to pursue research, teaching, dissemination, working together to preserve a world where books are not burned, words are not forbidden, and that we can bring other and face diversity of perspectives into our work and our studies. Thank you so much for this, for being here. Thank you.
Good night, good evening, colleagues and friends. Thank you, Hannah, for inviting me to introduce architect Nzinga MBoup. So until today, I've never had the pleasure to meet Nzinga in person. I first encountered her work online a few years ago in 2023, when she was appointed curator of the Canadian Centre of Architecture's program in Dakar. Since then, I've been following her work closely. So when Anna asked the team which architect we should invite to open our Congress on architecture, cities, and labor, the first name that came to my mind was Nzinga. Getting emotional as every time, sorry. So I wrote to Anna and the team saying, I think Nzinga is the perfect match for the Congress. She's an architect, but also a researcher. Her practice is based in Senegal, a leading country in West Africa in the field of architecture, and a country of great interest to our group, since our research focuses on Guinea-Bissau also. Senegal and Guinea-Bissau share parts of their history, material culture, and colonial legacy. Having Nzinga here today offers us a valuable opportunity to explore these connections. MBoup's work lies at the intersection of research and architectural practice. For this reason, it is deeply inspiring not only for architects and researchers, but also for historians and artists. Through her practice, she encourages us to think of architecture that is grounded in a careful understanding of socio-cultural, economic, and historical context, while also respecting climate and nature. At the same time, she reminds us that research is meaningful only when it informs interventions in the built environment. Perhaps for this reason, her work focuses on the most tangible and crucial dimensions of architecture, particularly in a country marked by a strong colonial history and complex post-colonial struggles. These dimensions include heritage and identity, labor and skills, craft and material culture. It is not coincidence that the landing page of Worofila, the collective architectural studio she founded in 2019, opens with images of earth bricks and the hands of the workers who shaped them. Nzinga is one of those African thinkers who looks to the past in order to imagine the future, who thinks locally while contributing to the broader global discourse on architecture today. Quoting the film director Trin Minh, who made the beautiful film Reassemblage on Senegal in 1922, Nzinga does not speak about architecture, she speaks nearby it. So thank you. Please join me in welcoming Nzinga MBoup on the stage.
Hello. Thank you so much for that incredible and very moving introduction. It's a true honor to be here. I guess part of the introduction should also mention that I do have some connection to Portugal, particularly the colonial history, because although I am Senegalese, I was born in Mozambique. And some people in the room will recognize my first name as coming from Angola. So I'm very, like it was mentioned, Senegal also neighbors Guinea-Bissau. So it's really good to be able to be here in a context where Portugal is addressing its colonial legacy. I'm very excited about the papers that are going to be shared by all the participants tomorrow. And yes, I wanted to take the opportunity today to share a little bit my sort of very multiple practice. When I read about this initiative that is ArchLabour, I really welcome the thematics that are being explored in this conference as an architect that has a practice that is deeply tied to place, culture, history, and that is nourished by the human ecosystem it sits within, particularly the knowledge systems that have shaped our landscape and cities. And within even the context of architectural education and discourse, I've grown this sort of frustrations to see buildings being addressed as objects, or when it only focuses on the spatial quality. Not to say that that's not important, but because of the practice that I've been running in Senegal, I'm now also very preoccupied by the modes of production, particularly the people that have powered the buildings, because whether we kind of think about where the materials come from, the quarry. We never think about the hand that sort of holds the chisel, or the mason and the kind of training that they may have gotten to be able to realize the building. So today I want to use Senegal as a sort of case study, present to you some of the research that I've done, a lot of it in my capacity as well as a curator for the CCA in the 3 years research program that in which I've been investigating Senegalese architectural traditions. And through my reading of the history, I'm able to kind of recenter how our connections with crafts through its people has enabled and empowered this sort of rediscovery of trades, of knowledge systems that have been indigenous to Senegal, and that have also produced really incredible architecture, which I hope can inspire more than just me, a whole generation of people, of my colleagues, both in Senegal, on the continent, and internationally. So, without further ado, I will start by presenting, I guess, what people mostly know me for. This is some projects of my architectural practice, Worofila. We have an attention to, we are preoccupied with producing an architecture that is rooted in place, that is adapted to the climate, and that also primarily uses biogenic materials such as raw earth. And we work in a range of projects and of contexts as well, from the inner city, doing residential sort of housing in the inner city, on the periphery, or working on infrastructure projects, always kind of coupling the sort of passive design methodologies to achieve thermal comfort and a form of, and a sort of expressive, if we could say, sort of language that utilizes primarily raw earth bricks. These earth bricks, and maybe it's worth saying that Worofila really started off as a collective because we were a few architects that met in 2017, and we met around a sort of material technologist, a Senegalese engineer called Doudou, who had moved back to Senegal in 2010, sorry, and had started this company called Élémentaire because he wanted to be able to produce sort of earth-based building components to make it widely accessible, because he too was aware about our sort of past history, a sort of conviction that there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to build today with earth. So he went to Grenoble, trained at Crater, and his thesis project was on how to build a sort of factory in Senegal. So he was able to do that, let's say, about 8 years before we started off working as a collective. So he was the glue that brought us together. Like the clay in these bricks. And it's really been a very unique learning experience to develop an architecture that has a certain level of proximity to the place of production. Very early on, in my first days back in Senegal, I went and spent days, sometimes weeks in the factory, because it was like an open air lab where I wasn't there, you know, in this any form of hierarchy, being the architect and just placing sort of orders, but I really was there to learn about the process of manufacturing, learn from the masons with their diverse experiences, and it's only because of that that I was able to do the projects that I showed you previously. And in that sense, everything starts at the place of production, and through the making and having a sort of hands-on experience, so to speak, to construction. We have the ability, I guess, to innovate, to experiment, but most importantly, to build very solid relationships that the sort of resulting architecture speaks to. And if we place this experience in the context of Senegalese modernity in general, we realized that a lot of the buildings that that surround us in Dakar or in Senegal have really feature one main material, which is concrete. In this sort of kind of collage and few selection of buildings that I'm doing in the context of my research with the CCA, I'm starting to try to read them through their sort of modes of production and primary material, and looking at buildings that also span across different timelines. So with each materiality, you can see, you can find stone buildings that are sort of 200 years old, and a few that are maybe 50 years old. And I guess the same is with concrete, although a little bit more recent. There are examples of architecture in the colonial era, when concrete, or cement anyways, was still imported, to other forms of more recent buildings or expression of modern architecture that have been that have actually generated a very sort of unique regional language. Many of these buildings, particularly the ones produced in the 20th century, try to use concrete in a way that sort of pays attention to the climate, particularly in this sort of sculpted form, where many times these concrete elements are there to sort of serve as brise-soleil on the facade, and also are very sort of expressive, if we could say that, have the kind of sculptural quality, which is why I called it sculpted concrete. And over time, and like I mentioned before, the initial or the original concrete buildings were made with imported cement, and over time, there's a sort of industrial cement factory that opened in Senegal, which is called the Sokosim. And it's interesting looking at the archives. I haven't included it here, but it was definitely a lot more expensive to produce locally. And as you kind of also understand what the sort of production colonial material complex was, it was always written when we were under French colonial administration in the specs that the materials a lot of times had to be coming from France, that was kind of a condition for public buildings. And slowly there was research in producing local cement. It was a lot more sort of expensive, but ultimately over independence, the cement factory got nationalized. And today it sits in the city of Rufisque. It's one of the old colonial sort of coastal town. It was mostly known because of because of the exports of peanuts. That's what Rufisque was known for. The peanut crops that would then get exported to Marseille. And Rufisque is also known for a particular resource, which is limestone. And it's not a surprise that the first cement factory opened its doors there. Previously as well, there used to be a jail in Rufisque, right next to the limestone quarry. So a lot of the earlier workers were actually prisoners, which echoes, I guess, many of the current realities about exploitation in the production, I guess, of construction material. The extraction of limestone today is mostly geared towards the production of cement. It generates its own level of pollution. Sometimes the workers' conditions as well in those quarries are quite precarious. And today, when we kind of look back and think about the very rich ecosystem that we had around limestone, when it wasn't a sort of primary ingredient for cement, we actually find a very distinctive form of architecture that where the limestone blocks were used as main masonry. And today it is just relegated to sometimes a paver material or a form of like cladding, but mostly used as aggregates in concrete, or again as a sort of main production along with clay, main material, for the production of clinker. I didn't mention before as well that now Senegal cement is probably the fifth export of Senegal. So we are a net exporter of cement, and it's something that is of a sort of a form of like national pride. So it's very tricky to criticize cement off the basis that it's a colonial material, because it's very local now. And I guess at this point, at this juncture, I'm a lot more interested in kind of understanding what the ecosystem of cement sort of takes away. And for instance, how it's impacted or disrupted the very sort of rich type of building that we had with limestone, where now limestone architecture is actually disappearing, not being maintained, and there isn't sort of this novel production of either quarried stone that could be used for masonry, and also the knowledge system associated with that has disappeared. And when I speak about knowledge systems, I guess it is very much tied to this architectural production. And I'm going to introduce or present a few buildings that I've come across in my research process that has shown me how these are not only interesting because their materiality does not center cement and concrete, but mostly because they've been powered by a form of trade, but mostly craftsmanship, that are endogenous to Senegal, and sometimes have had to kind of shift scale for the production of, let's say, of an object that usually was for the everyday use, to the production of architecture, which I find very interesting. This is, I actually found this in an old thesis from a Senegalese architect that was training at the school and that wanted to build a center for the arts and craft, and investigator was sort of documenting the different crafts that we have in Senegal. So I've used that as a kind of basis to sort of introduce these case studies and make the connection again between object and building through the skills and the knowledge. The first one that I wanted to focus on is straw and basketry, or sort of weaving, which may not seem to be the most evident one that would gain a connection with architecture. But when we look at Senegalese history, there's sort of this kind of rich ecosystem of actually buildings that have been made using fibers. Because we sit within a sort of Sahelian zone, we do not have that much timber, so we can't look at a lot of reference for timber architecture, but we have a very rich sort of vocabulary and sort of sources of various type of fibers, and which this collage sort of illustrates, and they're being used for baskets, to doing thatch roofing, and many other examples. I guess the most kind of ancient one that we see within architecture are in areas like in the south of Senegal, in Casamance, where there's a lot of sort of rice agriculture, and it rains a lot as well, so it's kind of tricky to have flat roofs. And particularly the sort of Basse Casamance sits close to rivers, so you have like mangroves, and again, different kind of like, sources for timber and fibers. And the impluvium houses of southern of Casamance feature this kind of tradition of thatch roofing, but also one where you have these floors, and this which through weaving, I guess, a form of kind of woven pattern, allows you to have sort of flat intermediate floors. And I found out in the 70s that one of our examples of, or most iconic buildings of this kind of movement of regionalist architecture, this building that sits within the center of Dakar called the ENA, which from outside you'll see actually is made with limestone. I haven't zoomed in, but that podium, it was actually cladded. It's mostly a concrete building, but it sort of has this kind of like cladding with local materials, an approach that was very key to the office that did this, the Bureau d'études Henri Chaumet, in the 70s. And then you have this pyramid, and as you go inside the pyramid, you sort of see again this illusion or this tradition of weaving that we see in the south of Senegal. And so that building that I showed before was in the 70s, but then I've learned about another building which has truly fascinated me for many reasons. Which is the Straw Palace that was actually built in the 80s. And I think, well, to me, represents a form of, I guess, what you could call a sort of neo-vernacular, in the sense that it actually utilizes traditional materials and techniques, but to create a building that was very sort of contemporary and actually very modern. It was the project of, what do you call it, a religious leader called Baïsi, who who is part of, let's say, the Mouridia brotherhood in Senegal. And it's a brotherhood, I should say, that places work and the ethic of work as a form of adoration. And they have a sort of subset of what do you call it, like an order that are equivalent to monks. So their way of, they don't have to pray because they're busy working. So in a way, they have this deal with the religious leader that he prays for them and they do the work. So work, that kind of like work ethic, is really central to that brotherhood. And with him, he had apparently this kind of vision that came from sort of, from God, telling him that he should find a way to actually use the most common material that is associated, let's say, maybe with poverty, and make this sort of masterpiece out of it. And he used straw because the city where he was based actually has a lot of straws that grows in the wilderness, and all the straws that are actually from agriculture. And the straw also has another religious sort of significance. It's because in Quranic school, many of the pens that are actually used to write are actually types of straws that are cut and then dipped in ink for writing. So he also saw this kind of really noble quality and almost sacred quality to straw, which he harvested. And I guess because he had a sort of large compound and a very extended family, and disciples as well, that will all sort of come together, weave this kind of, or create these sort of bundles of straws, weave it locally, and he was sort of directing them as well. Without, he's had a very kind of intriguing life, so I don't know where he sort of learned this from, but he sees this as a form of, and this palace as a form of demonstration of faith, and the sort of sublimation of a very simple material into a novel type of architecture. And the palace is burned down. It actually burned down three times. It's just that the last time it didn't get rebuilt because he passed away 2 years later. I think the last fire was in 2016. But every single time before that he had burned, he rebuilt a newer version of it. But now, after the last fire, which people suspect was criminal, he stopped. They never rebuilt it. But his son, who had participated to the building of the previous project, is still active, still lives on the ground of the old palace, and still holds a sort of weaving practices that he sort of utilizes to also continue to make these sort of building all kind of structures with woven straws. I think the year after his father passed away, he rebuilt part of the minaret for one of the father's disciple in an ashram, actually, and has done other buildings, mostly as restaurant dinners or outhouses. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a kind of major or building that is to the magnificence of what he's done. Nevertheless, I guess with us at Worofila, having the proximity to these tradesmen and to this craft allow us to also integrate some of this in our architecture. On the left is a picture of our neighbor in our offices of Fanok. His name is Tala. and he's a carpenter who with whom we've collaborated for many of our projects, particularly the ones that require prototyping, because I guess there's nothing more convenient than, being close to the person that is kind of making it. And I guess, through this sort of proximity, we're able to have dialogues and kind of figure and resolve these things together. Like in this case of this project called Gulbenkian, where I wanted to make this custom sort of all-in-one openings that will serve as security, would be openable windows. We have kind of like screenings. And because it's set within a marine environment, I didn't want to use metal as fear of erosion. So we use timber. And for the interior cupboard, he actually suggested to save money and not use solid timber, to actually use this kind of weaving mats, which is also made by local artisans around the corner. And on a different scale, I guess, another Worofila project really tried to work with a sort of novel fiber, if I could call it, which is an invasive species called Tifa, or cattails. It's endemic to, I think, regions of Germany and in the US, at least some species. It grows on the banks of the river Senegal. It's almost like a weed, but it has really great insulation properties. And we're able to work within a program set by the government to try to find a way to produce architecture, or sort of promote this material within architecture because of its insulating properties. So the Eco Pavilion, we use it as on the ceiling grid, just kind of this like cut woven panels, and also on the facade to sort of insulate the facade from the sun. Another craft which has really become, I guess for us, since we're working with raw earth, I guess fired earth was not part of our primary interest, but it's become more and more so true because of the research that I've done and my understanding of what the role that it's played in the production of some of Senegal's most iconic modern building. It sits at the sort of intersection between pottery, which is endogenous to Senegal. Senegal as well, maybe I should mention, has a caste system, or some Senegalese ethnic group, the dominant one at least, has a sort of caste system where people are actually separated by trades. So typically potters will be a separate caste system. You'll have the ironmongers as well, sometimes the sort of cobblers or the people that work with leather. So these are meant to kind of sort of keep the knowledge within a particular group, and it's something that people are very sort of protective about. Sorry. But yeah, so I'll speak a bit more about it. One of our most kind of iconic architecture, which actually it's in a city in Mauritania, but we claim it because number one, it's a border town. It's actually on the river Senegal, and it was actually at the time only accessible through Senegal. You couldn't actually access it through Mauritania, but it was co-designed by a Senegalese architect, Birahim, that is a graduate of the second class of the National School of Architecture that we had in the 70s and 80s. And this building actually won the Aga Khan Prize in '96, although it was built in the early 80s as well. And this man on the left is one of Senegal's, was actually the key sort of ceramicist that permitted, or at least trained the people on site to be able to make this building. The site, also, like I say, sits within the banks of River Senegal. It's really the north, so there's not much in terms of other types of materials. But on the banks of the river, you have a lot of clay. So you have a kind of very abundant primary material with which you could actually build. And for the architect, he told me that he shied away from raw earth, and he really wanted to fire the bricks in order to prevent any type of need for plastering and for sustainability reasons, and also use the brick as a sort of single element to generate this architecture. As you can see from the image on the right, there's nothing else that produces this forms if it's not for the bricks. And so the craftsman that made this possible is a man called Nzinga, that Birahim sort of handpicked to bring him to Kaidi. And Birahim, so on the left, it's him sort of looking at one of the archival images of the construction site of the hospital, which I found, which was really moved by. And he told me about their whole operation, how they came to actually choose the constructive technique based on the context, how he was trained. He's one of Senegal's first trained ceramicists. He graduated in 1966 at Dakar's training center. And at the time, he faced a lot of not pushback, but he had to also grapple with the fact that he was not part of the cast and he was doing sort of a type of work of typically people that are casted. But I guess he saw it and through projects like this as well, as a way to really express a new form of modernity in Senegal and not just be, for this craft, not just to be compounded to its traditional production of objects. So with Birahim, they thought about and investigated the type of ovens that they wanted to have, looked at the type of combustible as well that was available in the region, and set up a full sort of production unit, which these archival images are very, very important because they sort of show us some of the way in which the site was organized, which I will show you later, is something that Worofila today is very, really centers a lot more in the project. So yes, the building was, as you could see, again, from these archival images, predominantly done with the brick without necessarily needing any kind of like shutters to produce this really beautiful forms that made this hospital. Another building, which is a little bit interior to KD, but because it's is in Dakar, so it kind of set a little bit closer to the places of industrial production. Sorry, is the Hôtel des Almadies. It's a project that got demolished or is in the process of demolition, unfortunately, due to our sort of land speculation. And I'm just showing a few pictures of it because the bricks that were used to make that hotel were actually from a factory, a brick factory that got created actually at the same time as the cement factory, the first one that I showed you, but closed, let's say, in the early 80s. And it closed also because the cement factory actually bought it and sunk it. Which is always something that I found really fascinating because we always assume that, or we never really understand why certain processes in construction go out of style. We're being sold that it's because of progress, that I guess, building with concrete, steel, aluminum, or glass showcases that, we sort of moved forward. But when you kind of look back into history, you realize that many of these are actually not accidents. They are political, like in the case of this, Senegalese-based sort of brick factory that sort of went bust because of cement. The building almost entirely was made using these bricks and to do the vaults as well, which were then plastered. Sorry, let me look at time. So another craft, which in this case really sits more within the field of craft, as this picture can show, is the use of shells. I actually haven't found an accurate term for it, for its use within architecture. So maybe if anybody has suggestions or recognize this from the geography, they can tell me how you sort of call this. So I've just called it shell. And in Senegal, particularly in the coastal regions, the deltas mostly, there's a sort of very rich ecosystem of the use of these shells for crafts, like in the decoration of these kind of vases, but also for use as a kind of main material in masonry as well. Particularly in sort of island ecosystem, and then it sort of got translated to architecture, particularly through the sort of plastering or use of it as a sort of external material which works really well in coastal environments because it's very resistant to any type of saline air. And one of the most, I guess, iconic examples of its use, particularly in modern architecture, is with these auditoriums that are in our universities in Dakar that were built in the 70s. And on the bottom, you actually see some of the bricks that were produced in the factory that got bought off by the cement factory. And on the top, you have this sort of solid facade plastered with these shells. And the origin of the shell actually comes from fishing. It's predominantly any type of kind of seafood is fished for sustenance. It's sort of part of the food chains. And within the deltas, you have a lot of islands that are isolated, and other than sand, and the mangrove and maybe a few trees, you don't really have any other form of primary materials. You don't have stone quarries. So I think in the, let's say, 19th, 20th century, we see this kind of emergence of a technique which could have also been the product of an encounter with the French colonial administration. This technique called the lasso, which is kind of term for lasso, but where you have lime, which is made with these shells, or the leftover, I guess, the waste product from the food chain, and coupled with sand, which is found on the island, and the shells in themselves are actually used as gravel. As you can see on the walls of the woman that sort of sits behind it. And when you go on the islands, although this kind of technique has disappeared, or is disappearing, and the buildings are also disintegrating, you still see some kind of ruins, even in the buildings that I guess are falling apart, of this kind of technique that sort of uses really predominantly shell and sand as a kind of main construction material. And in other forms, you also see these kind of shells being sort of cladded on these sort of cement walls, which the architect for the auditorium, Thierry Melot, that was part of the Bureau d'études Henri Chaumet. I had a conversation with him at some point last year, and he confirmed to me that he took direct inspiration from the work of these artisans women, particularly looking at the kind of flower pots that they were selling, and using that directly onto this facade, working with some what do you call it, quite young artisans that apparently had a sort of internal competition to see who could kind of lay the most of these shells on the facade, in this case using white cement, and then painted as well. On the right, I guess you see a bit more of a close-up of the technique that is maybe the most ubiquitous, because the one on the left is maybe one of the rare examples in which we see sort of full shells used on the facade. Usually they're sort of crushed, mixed with dark cement or white cement, and then kind of applied on facades, which they tend to actually last for almost 50 years so far, because we see a lot of buildings that were built in the last, I guess, from the 70s through the 80s, still standing without needing that much renovation. So now, when it comes to, let's say, my own practice today, having learned from all of this research, I'm very committed to try to find a way to preserve these crafts, because I think, one, there's a really rich heritage and a very exciting opportunities to have diverse forms of architecture, not centering only a single material, whether it's cement or in our case raw earth, which we were very excited about. There's not all the sites that have the capacity for us to access those resources. Sometimes it may not be suited, and we sort of are learning more and more to work with the resources that we have locally, but also with the human ecosystem and the knowledge systems that are also presented in each locality. The first case study of this kind of recreation or preserving of heritage comes from this one building that I showed previously that is called the DUA. It used to be the Direction d'Urbanisme et Architecture, building because it used to house the direction of architecture. It's another building as well by the Bureau d'études Henri Chaumette, and it unfortunately got demolished in 2021, although the building didn't have any kind of structural failures. It's interesting, earlier when I heard the rector talk about the sort of ways in which certain localities can live with colonial architecture. I find that in Senegal, there's a kind of project of erasure of an architecture of certain epochs, and it sparks all constant debate about what is heritage. And you have to be also very careful because if you sort of promote the kind of preservation of heritage, it could be accused of being a romantic of a time where Senegal was under colonial administration. So I guess for us as young practitioners with this interest, and even for myself, I needed to find a way to sort of advocate for these buildings through a different lens. And I wanted to do so through the lens of their materiality, because I felt, and this is the thing that I guess sometimes hurts me the most, is that through these demolitions, you actually get to learn sometimes a lot more about these buildings and really see what they were made of, because some of the materiality is very apparent, like in this case, the sort of shell on the facade, but others are a lot more structural. And you can only sort of see it either during construction or during demolition. But yes, so in the first case study, we did, so this was in the context of a residency and around heritage that I did with another colleague of mine called Calouste. And we went to see some fishermen no, actually not some fishermen. This is a place in north of Dakar for anybody who sort of goes, where you have, yes, a lot of fishing happening and where you can go and eat a lot of seafood. So this is the back of the restaurant that actually have some of these kind of like shell waste, which we went and sort of bought from them in order to find a way to reproduce the facade of the building for the purpose of an exhibition. We didn't just want to sort of mimic it through actually engaging with the process and engaging with the people. Like this mason, for instance, that was one of the only people that we found that actually knew how to do it, because many were mixing it with plasters and it kind of appeared really milky. So he still had that knowledge because he trained in the 80s. And at a time where people were still building with those techniques. So he reproduced part of the facade at a small scale, and we'd also documented that process. And another materiality that building sort of contained were these also beautiful fired bricks, again produced by the brick factory that sort of closed down or got closed down. And same thing, we went and actually found some brick artisans that were still producing this kind of normally tiles for just floor covering, and asked them to sort of remake the sort of bricks that were at a smaller scale, of course, but were in the original building, and sort of rebuilt the facade ourselves, actually, in this case. So the artisan bit was just for the production of the bricks, but the kind of laying it out, we sort of like, did it ourselves in this exhibition that we sort of had planned, executed, and were able to showcase this demolished building, this recreation, let's say, of a demolished building, by also kind of highlighting the artisans that made it possible. So we used 3 parts of the building, and each time people had a sort of booklet. It's not there because this was pre-launch, but we had booklets with informations of the people that made this possible. Because for us, that was a lot more important than just dwelling on the past. We wanted to find a way to sort of bring this kind of knowledge to the present, and also possibly to the future, by ensuring and letting people know that they are, even though they are scarce, but still people and artisans that actually still hold these knowledge. Another exhibition in the same kind of vein that we did in 2024 was again in one of the institutions that we are neighbors with. It's just 5 minutes away from our office. And it's a training center for artisans, for crafts, so Centre de Formation Artisanale, where MBoup, the ceramicist that had built the hospital, had actually trained. So we had this program that was about learning how to build with raw earth that we wanted to exhibit, and we chose grounds for the exhibition. First, because it was the closest to us and they had space available, particularly the sort of unfinished building that we could occupy. But what also drew our interest is that one of the trainings that they propose is actually in ceramics, even though there's less and less people signing up for it, because also the stigma of learning about a sort of craft that is associated with a caste really prevents many people from signing up, and even the ones that graduate struggle to actually have a type of economic autonomy because of its lack of application outside of just doing domestic objects. So this is the site where we have the exhibition, the Centre de Formation Artisanale. They have a lot of sort of empty tables. So they have the infrastructure, they have ovens, they have this kind of like turning tables, but not a lot of students there. So we proposed to them by kind of looking at this sort of artisanal ceramic production, to set up a lab there where we could actually experiment with new forms of buildings, new forms of kind of wall assembly, particularly as we sort of moved away from working with compressed earth blocks, which actually utilizes, although small, but a certain amount of cement, to actually working with adobe blocks that are produced on site, but have no cement, so actually are what you call susceptible to water erosion. So in a way, using fired earth, which is actually waterproof, because the firing makes it waterproof with raw earth, in this type of kind of prototypes, allow us to have walls with a very unique sort of materiality, but are also protected, and kind of marry, let's say, the raw and fired earth techniques together. After this kind of months of exhibiting, experimenting, and also holding workshops in the training center, we were able to also develop the kind of architecture for a new training center in a city 30 minutes away from Senegal, which is a project that we call the MBoup Training Center. And the goal is for it to be a place where we can learn, where people can learn about sustainable construction, but also for the building to kind of speaks to the material of the city that we're working with, because it's very rich with different types of clay. It's had a history as well of having fired bricks. So the factory that shut down was just 20 kilometers away from that city. So as we were developing the architecture, we really wanted it to speak to the place. But then in terms of its programmatic response, we wanted to also restitute, I guess, everything that we've learned, and created a space for learning, a space for continued production, and a place for sharing in the form of exhibitions. So this is the project that is currently on site, completed, meant to be completed this year in Sébikotane. And like I said previously, what the research and experimentation was able to generate the architecture for it. So each of the various kind of 4 parts of this building have a very different architectural or material expression. So this kind of test that we did with adobe and ceramics, which also echoes other kind of mixes of raw earth and stone, particularly in the Arabian Peninsula, for similar reasons, to kind of prevent erosion. We did this kind of service tower, it's like 2-story, but service tower is going to be made out of it. And in this kind of mix as well of raw earth and ceramics for the classroom, it's a kind of double layer building where the outer layer is actually made with ceramics, is offset from the inner layer that is made with cob walls. Cob is a technique that is indigenous to Casamance, so the impluvium houses were made using this technique, and we were excited about the possibility to demonstrate the various ways in which, I guess, fired earth and raw earth could work together architecturally. So this is the facade that we are building now, the fired brick facade. And in the front, on the lower end, you could see the sort of adobes that we're able to produce on the site of the training center using the laterite from the site. So we didn't bring any kind of material for the raw earth production. And I guess through this project, because we've actually had to set up our own a production ecosystem, is made us very attuned to the subtleties of clay-rich soils, really learning by kind of doing a lot of material testing, but also setting up a whole production means also paying attention to what is the cost, for instance, of a material, right? Like how much are you paying people? Because before we used to just order from a catalog, but we never really understood what were behind those prices. So I guess with a project like this, we actually, because we're sort of building it ourselves, we're becoming a lot more attuned to it and obviously very sensitive to ensuring that everybody that works on that site, although it's a pedagogical program, so we're working with a lot of students, but that they're adequately paid, that they have holidays, that the sort of working hours are sort of respected. So there's, I guess as architects, it puts us in a position to just be a lot more intentional about the ways in which the workforce, let's say, is treated, and how ultimately as well it is sort of their project, because the whole kind of construction of this is to learn as well. So it is part of the pedagogy to also ensure that as people are making it, they also are learning. And where I would almost end, but I guess what this project has also made us realize is that if we kind of look at the current ecosystem of fired brick production in Senegal, there's been a revival in the last 10 years with the creation of two factories. One, the top one, Sofamac, in 2015, and below, Typhoid Ceramics is a new sort of Chinese factory that opened, I think, maybe 5 years ago, and already has sort of generated a lot of scandal because of the conditions of work, of remuneration of their workers. So I'm saying this just to say that one thing is to have the availability of certain sort of materials in our vicinity, but I guess it's also important for us to ensure that behind it are people that aren't being exploited, as much as we're excited about the prospect of working with these materials. And I guess it makes our work much harder, but we do feel that it is important to work with artisans, just because we have a direct contact with the people behind. And the reality is that we can also customize a lot more the product, and I guess just really understand and kind of be an active part of the production as well, because these are sometimes very sort of fragile ecosystems. So yeah, sometimes it takes much longer, but I guess we, again, are being put in a position where we can learn with the people and not just treat the artisans as a kind of executioner of a thought. So we think about their production schedule, we think about the seasonality, we have to be invested in where they get some of their clay, sometimes where they get some of the combustible, and also get immersed in some of the histories, like the ones of kind of fathers having to think about whether they'll pass down their knowledge to their sons or to their children, etc. So it becomes really part of the history of the project and part of our ecosystem that we're really attached to. Just to open it up to upcoming projects. So many of this research that I've done, so I mean, the Labo is the kind of architectural manifestations of a lot of this research that we've done. But beside the kind of build project, I guess with the CCA, there is an exhibition that we're planning for the end of the year, which is going to center all these various kind of forgotten techniques, particularly the artisanal ones that have produced Senegalese architecture, and finding a way, it's still in development, of course, but finding a way to actually center all the processes embedded in that. So the tools, for instance, that make fired earth in this context, to draw attention as well to the places of extractions and the conditions of extraction, and the diversity as well and types of materials that you can get, particularly when you take them directly from the quarry and not have them be sort of processed, but also what happens to the quarry after extraction. And lastly, to kind of look towards the future is the hope that with the discovery of this very rich kind of palette of techniques, people, architects, builders who will actually be inspired to propose prototypes of buildings, of objects for the future, but hopefully one that really thinks about the sort of social economic impact that again centers the human's ecosystem that these materialities are actually embedded with, but also again really tapping into the richness, the diversity, the sort of culture that these materiality and the people with those knowledge have been able to produce in our history. And I'll stop there. Thank you. A little bit? Okay.
Just use the chairs and invite. And so, thank you very much. So we are going to open a little for debate. And thank you very much for the presentation. I find it quite fascinating, the work. I was really looking forward to hear about it. Sit here. and maybe before, just before asking to the audience to express and to make some questions, I wanted to just put one question just to open. Sorry, just to open this part of the debate. So, first of all, what I really find really interesting was the way you find a way to look to vernacular techniques and crafts, to look through it using modern architecture. So this is quite very interesting. We have some here with us, some friends from Angola, for instance. We share with them several debates about what is heritage, the colonial, what is it is a colonial legacy or is something else. We, of course, in the beginning, long time ago, 3 decades probably ago, we found this modern architecture very fascinating for us, the Portuguese, since we have no examples in our own country that could be remarkable, like that examples that you can find in Mozambique, in Angola, even in Guinea-Bissau, in other countries. And so we were really fascinated. Our first look was to become fascinating about this modern architecture, and then we trying to understand and learn a little more about the stories that it was behind the design and then about behind the building, and now we are interested in the workers. So we were, just make a kind of a way to in the end starting. Well, we should have start from the workers, but we started from the building because we are architects. Sometimes we forget the fundamental part of it. We forget the people who really built it and how they built it and in the conditions that they lived when they were building and so on. And what is really fascinating is that you find a way to introduce the labor and especially the crafts through this, of course, beautiful architecture that we all agree that it was very beautiful, very interesting, but that could tell us more than just the static and the functionality and even the Western technology that you also introduced here when we were talking about the how it was produced, the cement, the fabric and so on. So I would like to answer nowadays. Well, of course, our projects, it's just look to the colonial part of the history and try to move a little forward, talking and debating with our friends in Africa, our colleagues there, trying to understand a little more what to do with this. So first, how to put it on the table. So should we, for instance, highlight the local crafts that you can find in these buildings, and that they are so unique because of that. And we have some examples, for instance, which Portuguese architects we don't know exactly if they were Portuguese, like Pancho Guedes, they said that he was born in Mozambique, that used these crafts a lot in their own buildings and try to explore this kind of plastic expressions. Should we look through this kind of lens, to put this lens and try to understand a little more, to learn a little more about these crafts, local crafts, and how they turn these buildings so unique? Should we, in a way, try to revive those techniques again? Because you are in a way trying to revive when you ask the worker to redone again this facade. It is only part of it, to understand a little how it was done in the first place. You are in a way trying to revive it. And for us, this is really interesting to understand, because we are just trying to see if our research could be important to practice, and could be important to the at least for the future. And how can we address these workers and their knowledge today, even if you are looking through the past? So I really would like you, if you want, or if you feel comfortable to do, talk with us a little, or describe a little more how did you realize that could be a way for you, for your work, to look at these colonial buildings and to look at the presence of these local crafts, African crafts in these buildings, and how the modern architects, in a way, these 70, 80 architects use that knowledge. Okay. And then, I don't know if yes, open, and maybe Francesco would like to add something.
I'll have maybe Nzinga to answer, and I can make a question if nobody will have one.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I would say that it's definitely, especially when we look at the sort of architectural production today, which I didn't dwell on, but I guess you can imagine what a lot of what is being built in Dakar today looks like what is happening in many places in the world. Like the architecture that we produce is definitely in the minority. There is a kind of interest in being globalized and kind of importing what a very singular form of architecture that kind of symbolizes modernity. So I guess by showcasing these sort of counterexamples from the past, which is important to also say that this was done with a myriad of actors. There's some of the buildings that were made by foreign architects, particularly French architects that were living in Senegal or moved to Senegal at the time. But some of them had like Senegalese clients. For instance, there was this billionaire from the 70s, 60s actually, that commissioned the Hotel des Almadies. Today the billionaires want international style architecture, but him at the time felt compelled by the possibility of kind of doing a building that is out of the ordinary and that utilizes this local crafts. So, and others, like the hospital was really made by a collective of West African architects. That had international funding grants, like almost like NGOs, but because many of them were sort of trained locally, they also wanted to find a way to express or create a new language for architecture that was both contemporary, local, because that was also part of the kind of political vision of the time. What I would say is that, so yes, of course, these serve as sort of counterexample to what is being done today. But in terms of the work that is being done in this conference and the research that you're doing, it's very important to kind of frame different viewpoints that have often been forgotten, because I hate the fact that we look at architecture ever as being something that is neutral or devoid of politics, of racial, sort of social hierarchies, and which bodies are kind of seen as even being worthy of authorship versus others. And that ultimately, again, robots aren't building for us, and even robots are made by humans or made with components that have been mined by humans. So ultimately, you still have humans that are behind all of the production process. So I think, and again, there's just this idea of just centering some stories versus the other, because the architects get to the credit sometimes, but not the workers behind it. So bringing those stories, I think, forward are very important. And I think when it comes to the local crafts, I think it's. I didn't dwell on it, but we have to be able to also understand it within wider ecosystems, and also be able to question them. Because with shells, for instance, it was very important for me to showcase that it's actually part of food production, because the moment that element of the chain stops working, then it's very difficult to find a way to sort of perpetuate something where at the source there's already a kind of danger or threat around it. So, for instance, there are places where you have islands that are built with shells, and if we're not careful and we sort of promote this sort of shell architecture, people are going to go and just collect the shells from islands. So that's why I say that even in the context of this exhibition that I'm preparing, I really want people to understand the full the full ecosystem context, and just to be very critical as well, because as much as, yes, these are local, yes, these are exciting, yes, this, for certain places in time, maybe are sustainable, it's not something that is always universal. And yes, and again, really going back to even what I said about ceramics, there's different types of ceramics, right? Like the ceramic that is produced by like a small sort of family unit, and one that is produced by kind of like a large factory that kind of pollutes its environment or underpays its workers is very different, even though you couldn't tell it from the final product. So again, being as kind of wide as possible, and just really remaining very critical. And by no means do I want to glorify and just say that it's a kind of standalone solution, because even when it comes to the primary materials that we use, which is raw earth, it's not, there are places, like I went to these islands where they only have sand. Like what business do I have working with raw earth there when it's not endemic or endogenous to the place? So yes, the key thing I would say is criticality, but also trying to find ways to, yes, investigate what the current ecosystem is, and trying to see how, I guess, even as architects, we could be a lot more intentional in supporting it. Yeah.
Maybe Francesca, please.
I'm just afraid of the time.
The time, yes.
I think we have 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
I don't know, we can gather quick questions because I know it's dinner time. Yeah. And then maybe we collect all, and then Nzinga will answer them.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm here. It was quite inspiring. And when you talked about the Chinese factories, it seems that the empire never left because of the workers' conditions. It's so sad to hear that. My question for you is a little bit noisy. Let's see. I'm an Arab, so I need to look into a few things. So my question to you would be, all this work you've been doing is amazing and great, and I'm wondering about the logistical part. Did you get any funding from Senegal, from the state, or from any other ways of fund? How did you fund this work? Because it's not easy. I'm from Africa as well, so I know how it is sometimes. Thank you so much.
Okay, so just a quick question. If you'd like to grab it, just in case there are no others. I very much appreciated your presentation, discovered your work, which I didn't know much about. It did trigger a number of thoughts about things I've seen in my short life so far. You're saying repeatedly that your work is political, but you're being quite elusive about where you stand. So are you closer to William Morris or to Ernest Schumacher?
Where are they? Sorry.
Just wherever you want to bring this question to.
Yes. Sorry.
Hello, thank you so much for that presentation. Something that I'm thinking about as I'm reflecting on the very complex ways that you work with artisans and other kinds of makers, but also represent their histories. I really appreciated that we saw so many examples of what I think are authorial figures, right, on par with that of, say, an architect, but who are not architects, actually, but who are not kind of, I wouldn't necessarily put within, say, what has, in many contexts around the world, been understood as traditional artisanal labor, in the sense that they're kind of subsumed within a community or hereditary relations, but actually that they're also claiming authorship in certain ways. So I'm wondering if in your interactions and working with artisans, are there ever moments where the artisans you work with also kind of transgress their role as artisans and also seek recognition, right, in other ways than they are kind of either have historically been marked as artisans or are marked as artisans in the present, right? Like claims to authorship, intellectual property, also claims to collaboration, right? Say with yourself as an architect. So I'm just interested to hear, you know, how they make claims to say authorship outside of the kind of historical recognition that they might get as artisans. So thank you so much.
Nzinga, I'll gather the last question and then we answer, yeah, and wrap up.
I'll answer quick, I promise.
Thank you so much. Building up, the presentation, first of all, was very inspiring for me as an African, but also as a fellow architect. To follow up on the previous question, I was wondering, isn't the epitome of empowering these craftsmen to give them the stage as they have historically, worked themselves without the need for an architect? And so, what good is an architect in your shoes? Like, what is your role once these craftsmen take back their ancestral role as the religious figure that you mentioned? Looking at this kind of paradox of building a palace out of something as humble as hay. Did he need the services of an architect, or was it his own inspiration, his own collaboration with the craftsmen? And so would you see ultimately your end goal is to retreat as an architect and leave the floor completely for the artisans, not just as hands that, as you said, execute, but also the minds that design as well? Thank you.
Thank you so much for all these questions. I'm going to start with the last one, I guess, because it's fresh in my mind, but it's connected with the question before that. So I think in most of the African languages that I know or that I've been exposed to, I don't know what the term for an architect is, but there's always a term for a builder. So already even this kind of separation between who's an architect, who's a mason, who's a craftsman, are all I'm not going to say necessarily Western, but maybe a sort of product of kind of modern times. But it's not really one that you always recognize in the production of other type of buildings, like the ones that palace. Of course not. There was no architect. In a way, I want to say that no architect would probably be capable of actually doing something of the sort. You know, I'm being a little bit harsh, but. There's many examples like that where you see that, and in traditional construction, where the architect in the way that we see it today is completely obsolete. So, and many of the times, I guess, in modern context, people build by themselves. Like people do not wait for architects to build, and even as we've done, let's say, our earlier projects. With these, factory-made, like compressed earth blocks. We've slowly wanted to move away from that because if we're not working with constructive systems that are not democratic, we're just going to continue to do work that is secluded for certain elites. So it's prompted a lot of the kind of reflection around the training center and how we could go towards techniques that are a little bit more sort of low-tech, and that we could also train people so that a larger amount of people can kind of espouse it. Even the simple things, of course, are very technical, so we don't want to also give too much the kind of illusion of ease, particularly because there are a lot of bad practices in auto construction. But it's there is already a reflection about how to make ourselves obsolete in a way, in the sense of being the kind of just designers or kind of technical advisor, but we're moving towards being more builders, sharers as well. And that kind of solidifies a bit already how we saw our relationship, or how our relationship with many of these sort of artisans have grown, because there is, in maybe fields outside of architecture, but even within architecture, especially when you work with people that have been doing certain things for their whole lives, when you come with a drawing as an architect, like, we trained for, 5 years, 5 to 6 years, and then, we go on the field and we do these designs, and you're facing people that are part of traditions of doing certain things. So very quickly, they're able to kind of challenge what you're showcasing them, and you could sort of argue and risk it failing, or we can kind of like listen and kind of find a way to be able again to learn from each other. I guess sometimes what we're able to do as architects is just challenge them a little bit. In the context, like I say, of fired bricks, I'm very interested in that crafts because ultimately it is pottery to do everyday object. To do that shift into construction did require some architects. And I guess, we could question whether it was relevant or not, but then the architecture was able to kind of bring it, I guess, to a different scale. And in the context of Senegal today, where particularly the training school is having less and less students, we're interested in finding ways to kind of, re-elevate or reinvigorate as well that kind of knowledge system through new forms of architectural kind of production and experimentation. But yes, when it comes to authorship as well, I don't know if the workers necessarily always think, or craftsmen, that, we have any kind of hierarchies, especially if we've sort of worked out on something on ourselves. A little funny anecdote is that often on site, and it's happened many times, we ask for something to do, we like propose a design or a new prototype. We've been told it's not going to work. We discuss. We're like, okay, why is it not going to work? How about this, etc. And sometimes, but this happens not with masters workers. It happens with masons mostly. They challenge us, they argue, and then in the end, when it works, they're the first ones to post it on their WhatsApp stories. And when that happens, I'm like, yes, we, on the same page, because finally you're proud of this product, and then, it opens up the doors for more orders, and for them to also again take its ownership of it, and for it to have its life of its own. And for me, again, I see it as a kind of result of success of collaboration. Quickly on funding, and as a researcher, I was speaking about this 2 days ago. The early research work that I've done, and I haven't showed this here, but the very first ones that I did 8 years ago were completely self-initiated. it took a while, let's say, in my life of a researcher to start getting sort of funding for it. I guess I'll always use also the space of projects in order to kind of do the research. So in a way, it's kind of like on clients' expense, but not really, because you obviously have to go above and beyond. Like this work that you do with the artisans, they're not billable hours. So a lot of it is kind of associated with risk, but to be completely transparent, that's one of the reasons why I moved back. In the early years, I was living with my parents, and not getting any salary. And I was 28 years old, and I felt that, you know, if not now, when could I actually just make space and take the time to really be able to, yes, go to Alimentaire's factory and spend like a week there, because I didn't have like a job to sort of go to. So there is a certain element of kind of, I would say, maybe even privilege, because not maybe everybody at 28 can kind of move back and just, you know, stay with their parents and kind of be unemployed. But yeah, so that really empowered me to kind of, yeah, have that freedom to really investigate what I wanted. But further down the line, other kind of international institutions like the CCA has been able to support and create, let's say, a field for me to do this kind of research work for 3 years. And others with the Labour is because of, it's a result of, it's funded by the REARC Institute, which is based between Denmark, and the UK, and really seeks to support architects doing work in their locality. And I guess with the CCA, it's the same. It's really to support the work being done locally, to try to kind of amplify what was already being done to reach wider audiences. So this has happened, let's say, in the last 3 years, but before that, it was just, yeah, through the project and the time that I could kind of set aside that I've done this thing. And the other question, I really don't know how to grab it. If it's a political, yes, it is where I stand. I think it speaks for itself. So
okay, so thank you very much. We really have to end. But so tomorrow we will continue this conversation, and okay, so see you tomorrow. Have a very good night sleeping.
Tomorrow's sessions will start at 9 a.m. Please be on time, especially the presenters and the chairs, because we can't lose time. Thank you.